City of Ann Arbor 2018 Sustainable Ann Arbor Forum. Measuring Sustainability. Presented by AADL in partnership with the City of Ann Arbor.
Thank you. So I'd like to start off, first of all, before I get into introductions and presentations, with some thanks. First of all, thank you for coming out this evening. It's a cold February night, and hopefully we don't get snow before we head home, but thanks for being here. You are our customers. We are here to serve you. I'd like to start with some other thanks as well. First of all, to the public library. They are great hosts, and I'd like to especially thank the staff that's here tonight. I'd also like to thank the City of Ann Arbor for organizing these events. The woman that does most of the work, unfortunately, was supposed to be here tonight as a presenter. She puts this whole thing together, markets it and everything else, but unfortunately she came down with the flu. So Emily Drennen is somebody that we're thinking about tonight, and we wish that she was here with us. So on to tonight's presenters and our topics. Originally, we had planned to have a more balanced panel. We were going to have 2 men and 2 women. Unfortunately, as I said, Emily got sick. We also were going to have someone from NSF that was going to present a industrial perspective, and unfortunately we had 2 people from NSF that got waylaid by family circumstances and business circumstances. So now you have 3 gray or graying men up here.
Distinguished.
Right.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that.
I'll speak for myself. So I'd like to introduce us. First of all, I'll start with Andy Berki on my far right. Andy grew up in Ann Arbor. Andy has what I would say blue blood. His father was a U of M professor, and he and his siblings all attended the University of Michigan, so we can say go blue together. Andy has been working actively within the sustainability field since the early 90s. He's currently the director of the Office of Campus Sustainability for the University of Michigan. That means all U of M recycling operations and energy management functions fall under OCS. The office is comprised of 19 full-time equivalents, and they also typically have around a half a dozen interns working for them. They work on a wide array of programs related to advancing the university's long-term sustainability goals, as well as collaborative efforts with research and academic functions, and of course, student sustainability initiatives. Andy received his BS, as I mentioned, from the university, its School of Natural Resources. On my right is Matt Naud. Matt grew up in Detroit, so he's also a local boy. Matt came to Ann Arbor originally to get his Master's of Science in Biology in 1984. He then worked at Ecogen and then for the University of Michigan, while at the same time obtaining his Master's in Public Policy at the Ford School. Matt left the area for a decade when he worked as a project manager at ICF Incorporated. That's a large management consulting company. He returned to his senses and to Ann Arbor in 2001 when he became the city's environmental coordinator. He works in the city's system planning department. In parallel, he has been a member of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network since 2010, and from 2014 to 17, he also served on the EPA Board of Scientific Counselors Sustainability and Healthy Communities Subcommittee. In addition to his master's degree in biology and public policy from the U of M, Matt has an undergraduate degree from Boston College, and he and his family live in Ann Arbor. Like Andy, I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, as my father also taught at the university. I moved back here in 2015 with my wife after working 37 years in industry with Robert Bosch. That's a large German-based company. That's a global 100 company where I work primarily in manufacturing and in business unit management. And then the last 10 years of my career, I was responsible for corporate functions related to engineering and technical functions. In addition to my role as an advisor to the administrator, I'm also on the Energy Commission and the Environmental Commission, and I have a BS and an MS in mechanical engineering from Michigan and Stanford. So, let's get going. This evening, each one of us are going to offer a perspective, a different perspective on measuring and tracking sustainability. So let me get here. We are going to talk each for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we will take your questions at the end. First of all, I would like to cover some basics that I think sort of lays the groundwork for what each one of us are going to talk about. Let's start with what is sustainability. So a contemporary definition of sustainability is on the chart. It's a sustainable future is one in which a healthy environment, economic prosperity, and social justice are pursued simultaneously to ensure the well-being and quality of life of present and future generations, and you could also say ecosystems. The graphic illustrates this desired balance nicely. I think it's self-evident that a sustainable community is what Ann Arborites value and what we want. Thus, we strive to achieve outcomes which are in the center sweet spot of this graphic. So, the second basic is why measure and track sustainability. And I would answer that with an old adage expressing what I think is a general truth: what gets measured gets done. And a corollary of that follows, which is speak with data. If you speak with data, that drives informed improvement. Simply stated, if we want sustainable outcomes, we need to measure and track progress towards our goals. Third, I'd like to offer a posit, what I consider to be a fact put forward as a basis of argument that leading entities operating in all fields, in academics, in municipalities, in business, implement a standard frame of excellence around which they organize and guide their activities. What does that framework look like? So, this is my version of the framework, but I think it's pretty universal. In my version, there are 7 key framework elements, and they are shown on the left. The first is a strong leading entity has shared values. Those are cultural norms which serve as the basis of decisions and for making policies. An organization should also have a shared mission statement. It's a statement of purpose. It should also have a shared vision statement. That's a description of future aspirations and outcomes. It then needs to have a shared strategic plan, which is a high-level roadmap to achieve the vision. Next, that is expressed in what are called SMART goals that I'll explain in a minute, with their associated targets. Those are used to track progress against the strategic plan and achievement of the mission. Good organizations also employ what is called in lingo lean enterprise or continuous improvement. Those are tools, methods to improve performance. And then finally, organizations use regular, rigorous review meetings to review progress towards the goals and the achievement of the strategic plan and the mission. So those 7 elements fit into what is often called a plan, do, check, act, or adjust cycle, or PDCA cycle. The first 3 elements fall under plan. That's designated by the P in the left-hand side of the slide. those are generally fixed for a long period of time. They do go in a cycle, but they're typically not something that is changed every year. It's something that's typically fixed every 5 to 10 years. The other 4 elements which complete the PDCA cycle are repeated iteratively. Tonight's forum is focused on measuring sustainability with SMART goals and tracking them in review meetings. So, what are SMART goals? And we'll be giving you examples of SMART goals. SMART goals, or sometimes called indicators, or people will also throw in the word metric, they are specific. That means they're very well defined. They are something that is measurable. They're attainable. That means they need to be realistic. That doesn't mean that an organization goes on and sets all kinds of unrealistic targets that it doesn't have the resources to meet. That means they should also be relevant, meaning they correlate well with desired outcomes, and they should be time-bound, where there are due dates for outcomes as well as the projects and tasks that lead to their completion. Ideally, a full complement of SMART goals should include a balanced set of leading and lagging indicators, which should be visualized and tracked using trend charts. A lagging indicator is something that is an outcome that may not happen or occur very quickly. It's something that is like a tanker that turns very slowly. But you want to also have leading indicators, which are other measures that correlate well with the lagging indicator, that are a good signal that you're on the right track. And so you can measure these leading indicators, and if something is going wrong, you can take action before you find out a year later, 5 years later, that you're off track and that you should have been doing something differently. So I talked about trend charting. This is what I would call an exemplary generic trend chart. What makes it exemplary? First of all, it should be clear who is responsible for the chart. And that means not only the chart itself, but who is responsible for and accountable for the results and the performance that's in the chart. The chart should also indicate what is the direction of positive trend. In some cases, obviously, a downward trend is positive. For other metrics or indicators, a positive trend may be up. And then finally, a simple signal, in this case, a stoplight, red, yellow, green. Are things going well, or are things not going well? The next thing that a good trend chart should show you are long-term targets. They should either be on the chart or they should be associated with the chart. And the source of those goals should be referenced. Ideally, those goals should be benchmarked against what other peer entities are doing. It doesn't make any sense for Ann Arbor to say we want to improve something 2% per year, or for the university to do the same when peer institutions are improving at 5% per year. So you need to have some kind of a benchmark when you set your targets. Another thing that a good trend chart does is, obviously, it has clearly defined tracking periods on the x-axis. It also has tracking units on the y-axis. It should also have some kind of like a scale break if you're not starting in 0, so it's very clear to everybody what they're looking at. You can see a long-term trend. So in this case, this is just a generic chart. You can see I start in 1990, then 2000, then 2010. You can see what's going on over the long term, and then also more recently, what is the current recent trend. Very important is that there are targets shown for each one of those periods. That is a signal to everyone. Is the organization consistently setting realistic targets, and is it meeting those targets? The aggressiveness of the targets are also very important because they imply the strategic importance or priority of that metric for the organization. Very, very important metrics are going to have very aggressive targets, Ones where it's not as important or where you're already doing well, you don't need such an aggressive target. Another thing that a good trend chart will do is that it'll become very, very obvious if there's any kind of a negative trend, which indicates that some kind of intervention is necessary. As you can clearly see, a trend chart like this can be used for any sustainability metric. It could be used for serious crime. It could be used for recycling. It could be used for affordable housing. Any chart that looks like this could be adapted to do that, and by understanding a chart like this and looking at it, within a minute, you know how the entity is doing against its targets, how good its performance is. So finally, in terms of basics, measuring performance isn't good enough. You really need to track performance versus your SMART goals in regular, rigorous review meetings. And they are, in my view, the most important element in a plan, do, check cycle, plan, do, check, act cycle. Reviews drive progress and results. They ensure projects are on target and schedule and budget and are having the intended impact on performance. They also allow issues to be escalated and resources to be allocated, and they serve as forums to change or to challenge approaches, processes, including what's the composition of the project team or the team responsible for achieving the performance, looking at policies, are those proper, do you need to do new training, etc. And ideally, in any organization, there should be a hierarchy of these kinds of review meetings, starting at the working level where you're working on projects, and then going up to leadership level where you're looking at overall high-level metrics and whether or not the performance is being achieved. And that includes, frankly, even meetings like this, presenting to the public and showing how things are going, and that's the last point here. Ideally, for any organization, these are relatively public, but it's especially important for governmental entities that they hold public meetings to cover how their performance is, because that really demonstrates transparency and promotes trust. So with that background, I'd like to start with how sustainability is measured and tracked in Ann Arbor. So I will cover that, and then Matt will talk about another way that Ann Arbor measures and tracks sustainability relative to a certification process that we went through, and then Andy will talk about how this is done for the university. So before I get into this, I'm going to ask people to put their hands up just to get a sense of how familiar people are with what I'm going to be covering. And that is, I'd be curious how many people in the room have heard of the Ann Arbor Sustainability Framework? So maybe 60%, 70%. That's good. So leave your hands in the air. How many have looked at the dashboard for the Sustainability Framework and are aware of it? A few hands more go down, okay. How many have looked at that dashboard? How many have done that in the last 6 months? Okay, so we got maybe a half dozen people or something like that. Very good. Glad to hear it. So I'm going to talk about the framework, give some background on it, and then talk about some of the measures that indicators that Ann Arbor uses. So Ann Arbor has a so-called sustainability framework and a metrics dashboard. The sustainability framework has 4 theme areas and 16 goals, and because the print is pretty small, I'm going to read through each one of those for you. By the way, those 4 theme areas cover the areas that I talked about at the beginning. It talks about the environment, it talks about society, and it talks about or addresses economic development. So the first theme area in Ann Arbor's framework, and this is a framework, by the way, that was adopted by City Council in 2013 and is a formal part of Ann Arbor's master plan, which you could equate with a vision for Ann Arbor. So the first theme area is climate and energy, and there are 3 goals: sustainable energy, energy conservation, and sustainable buildings. The next, dealing more with societal kinds of issues, is community, and there are a number of goals in that theme area. Those are an engaged community, providing diverse housing, providing human services, providing a safe community, ensuring active living, and economic vitality. The third theme area is land use and access, and that has 3 goals: providing a variety of good transportation options, sustainable systems, and integrated land use. And then finally, the last theme area is resource management, where we look to have clean air and water, healthy ecosystems, responsible resource use, and local food. There are currently, as indicated in the second line, 38 fluid indicators, and that's because those indicators are optimized over time, sometimes dropped, improved. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But there are currently 38 indicators or metrics that are used to track progress towards Ann Arbor's 16 goals. So these are essentially like SMART goals or SMART indicators that we use to track our progress. And together, they sort of build a framework, if you will, around the sweet spot that I showed you at the very beginning, where you have the environment, society, and economic development. That sweet spot in the middle is essentially framed by these 16 goals and 38 indicators, and trying to meet those goals. As shown on the right-hand side, each indicator is evaluated using this set of tools, which is very similar to the stoplight. So first of all, it indicates where are we now? Are we red, yellow, green? And then what is the trend? Is it positive? Is it stable? Or is it negative? So what I'm going to do, because I can't cover 38 indicators, I'm going to go over 5 examples. But before I do that, I want to give some general comments about the status of our framework and what we're doing. First of all, as you'll see, most Ann Arbor indicators are well conceived. There is a bit of a concern that I have from my perspective, and that is the city uses something called the National Citizen Survey, and of the 38 indicators, 12 of those are reliant on the Citizen Survey. The problem with the Citizen Survey is that it's not really tangible outcomes. It's not necessarily entirely represented because it's self-selecting who answers it, and you may not get a real read on what the true performance is in that area. But by and large, the indicators are pretty good that Ann Arbor uses. Secondly, the dashboard is infrequently used by city administration, the mayor and council, and boards and commission. That's at least my perception, and we can talk about that later. City and council do use some metrics. For example, they use those in their topical work sessions where they pick certain topics and look at what's going on in the city, but the dashboard use could be a lot better. Also, public awareness in use is also limited, and that was demonstrated by everybody's hands a few minutes ago. And finally, we admit that charts are poorly executed and evaluated and poorly maintained in many cases. So what are we going to do about that? So because of some of the issues that we have, the city administrator has planned improvement actions. And he intends to do that with my and staff support. First of all, the Energy and Environmental Commissions put together a subcommittee to look at our metrics. They reviewed all of the relevant dashboard indicators and proposed changes, and those changes will be implemented by the end of May. Next, trend charts, so that they look more like the ones that I show you, will be developed and implemented by the end of July. Also, city departments have been charged or will be charged to develop performance measures and internal and external dashboards by the end of July. And then finally, all city departments are to develop proposals for a rolling 5-year work plan to address all sustainability goals, beginning with the fiscal year 2020 budget. That sounds like it's a long way off, but actually, the planning for that starts in this fall. So let's look at 5 representative dashboard examples from the Ann Arbor a2gov.org site, and this is the web page that you can find them at. I'm going to pick 5 examples that cover all 4 theme areas, so you get a little bit of a sense of each one of the theme areas. So first indicator is Ann Arbor community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. That falls under the theme area climate and energy, and the specific goal, energy conservation. This is a little bit hard to read, but it is, I would say, the most important goal relative to Ann Arbor's climate action plan. Ann Arbor's climate action plan defines progress to reduce our greenhouse gases out to 2050. And if you can basically make the chart out, it's really an excellent lagging indicator, and the chart is pretty good. You can see on the left-hand side, the baseline of 2000 is defined. Ann Arbor, by the way, is the green bar, and the blue bar on top of that is the university. So we're tracking really just from the city's perspective, just Ann Arbor's and the community's progress. As you can see, we updated that in 2010 and again in 2015. Ann Arbor met its target in 2015. However, it did so mostly because of DTE actions, where DTE has cleaned up its energy, and also because in Ann Arbor, it used to be that the old Pfizer property was part of the Ann Arbor community metrics, and with the purchase or the sale of that to the university, as you'll hear from Andy, that went into the university's emissions. So that went down. I'll take questions at the end if that's okay. Unfortunately, one problem is it's pretty difficult to update this. So you can see it's not updated frequently. That means we're driving a little bit by looking in the rearview mirror. Also, the evaluation, the red with an arrow really is probably more yellow because we did meet our target, although we didn't meet it in a way that we would like to. So the next indicator is actually 2 indicators. Those fall under the theme area community and under the goal of providing diverse housing. So the first pie chart is for owner costs as a percent of household income, and you can see there's a snapshot there from 2014. And then there's a second related metric, which is rent as a percent of household income, also in 2014. These are good metrics. There are some issues, obviously, if you think back to my generic trend chart. First of all, there's no trend. So if you look at this, you only see a snapshot. Secondly, there's no goals defined. So this is something that we're going to have to work on the city. There are some goals, but it's actually not tracked. The city, as you may know, set a goal of creating 2,800 affordable housing units between 2015 and 2035. So that would be an ideal indicator to chart, to set annual goals and make sure that we get to that 2,800 by 2035. So as I mentioned, there's no trend data, so there's really no basis to evaluate the trend, so the red with an arrow up really doesn't make sense. It's something that we would have to then establish as we pull more data together, as I said, with the improvement actions that I talked about earlier. So a third example is from the theme area community. And you will recall that there's a goal there called ensuring that we have a safe community. And what we're measuring here is crime in Ann Arbor. So that's the indicator.
Change the slide.
Oops, thank you. It didn't click.
There you
Sorry, go. Thanks. You can't see that. Now you can see it. So as I said, this is theme area community. The goal is safe community. The indicator is crime in Ann Arbor. This is really a good indicator, but in my view, it could be improved. First of all, we're looking at absolute numbers here. And the standard for measuring this across the country is a rate. What is the number of crimes per 100,000 residents? And so that allows you to benchmark Ann Arbor against other towns with slightly different populations. And like I said, it's a standard. Fortunately, as was recently reported by the mayor in his reports to residents, Ann Arbor is actually performing very well here. We benchmark very, very well against other U.S. cities and certainly against our peer cities. We're in the upper 20%. So the basics are good. Simply what we have to do is take this trend chart, make a few changes so that it truly reflects the current situation, put some longer term trends on there, and then we have a much better sense of how we're doing. So the fourth sample, getting to the end, is under the theme area land use and access with the goal of transportation options, meaning providing good transportation options. So the indicator here is the overall ease of travel as rated positively by residents or by citizens in the National Citizen Survey. This is a good indicator in a sense that it's basically how we perceive what our transportation options are, but obviously it doesn't really track or tie to any kind of objective measure. So we're thinking about adding to this. The other thing is, as I mentioned, it's a self-selecting group that answers these surveys. So there's some good things about this and some not so good things about this. The other issues are we only have two data points, so we really don't have a very good trend, and we really don't have a defined target. The verbiage that goes along with this talks about a national benchmark, but the benchmark is not really defined. So we really should be defining for ourselves as a city, what do we want, what do we expect in terms of a result here, and maybe some other kinds of indicators that do a better job of providing some really objective measures on what the transportation options are. And then finally, the last sample indicator is under the theme area resource management, and it's the goal area clean air, also for clean water. I'm only going to show the clean air part, and that is the percent of days in air quality index categories. This is really an excellent indicator. It comes from data from the EPA, and it's according to a national standard. The city obviously needs to set a target, and that could be simply adopting the EPA recommendation, or if Ann Arbor thinks it should be better than that, it could set a more aggressive target. Also, as you can see, the last time this was updated was with the middle of 2016. So we need to provide the year-end data in 2017. If we had a goal and then the trend, it would be really clear what the evaluation is. So I hope with those 5 examples, you have a pretty good idea of how Ann Arbor measures sustainability. You also have some insights in how we track it and where we intend on doing a better job of that. In closing, I have a few requests of you and of all of us. First of all, I'd like you to go home and review the other sustainability dashboard indicators online. Do that keeping in mind the comments that I had. So contrast what they look like and what they're measuring with best practices that I've described. You can do that really simply. Go home, Google Ann Arbor Sustainability Dashboard. The very first thing that comes up is the dashboard and a link to that. Then I would say continue to be engaged citizens and residents as you have been tonight. That means encouraging City Council, the City Administration, and frankly, boards and commission, anybody working for the city to use rigorous, regular review meetings, and to also use proper trend charts. Attend public meetings that track performance, and then finally hold the city responsible and accountable for meeting its goals, its SMART goals, remember goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Thank you very much. So I am going to hand things off to Matt, and Matt is going to talk about, Matt, star communities and our 4-star certification.
So, yeah, as John showed you, Ann Arbor is a pretty sustainable city. It's just how do we keep track and keep score? And, what you're seeing is a snapshot. We created this sustainability framework. What are the metrics? Some of them are good, some of them are bad. John's been giving us a lot of good advice on how we can move forward. What I'm going to talk about now is kind of metrics on steroids. There is this thing called the Star Community Index, Sustainability Tools for Assessing and Rating Communities. This was created, it's a nonprofit. It was created by cities. I'm part of this Urban Sustainability Directors Network. Cities got kind of tired of World Wildlife Federation and other NGOs just deciding that some set of metrics were going to decide which cities are most sustainable when it wasn't really comparing apples to apples. So this was really an exercise to create 508 data points. And you too, if you read the 400-page manual on how to document each and every one of those data points, can get certified by the STAR Index. So we held off on this for a while. So it's a lot of work. But we had a grad student from the University of Michigan, God bless her, Angie Wilson, who's not here tonight, but she decided to do this as her master's project. So we had a person that was willing to help. Emily Drennen, Josh McDonald, who are staff that work with us, pitched in a lot to help coordinate. Because the STAR Community Index is different because most of the things John was talking about are within the city's span of control. And STAR is looking at things like how many people go to public art events, job creation and things like that, where that's really in Spark and it's a broader public health. City doesn't really deal with public health. That's all at the county level. And so we had to really go and get data from a variety of places. But what's interesting is it is all exact, and there's 67 cities we can compare ourselves against. So I'm going to try and run through this quickly. It's data rich, but you can ask questions at the end. And all of our points are available up on the web. It's publicly available. So let me start going through this. Started in March of 2016, and we were part of a leadership group where 4 cities all got together. We got a little scholarship money from STAR to help with this. So we were with Pinecrest, Ann Arbor, Dallas, and Winston-Salem. Spent about a year working on this. It's a big organizational challenge, all these points. Whose do we think knows the answer? Some of this we're tracking. Some of this we've never tracked before, but for STAR, you have to document it. So, for example, show that you don't have any food deserts. So where are all the healthy food stores in Ann Arbor? Well, it's not anything the city tracks. We don't license businesses. So, but Ann Arbor's small enough, we could say, well, there's Lucky Market went in, and Argus Farms went in, and there's how many Whole Foods? And so we could draw the map, get our GIS guys to do it, and get some points. So to get certified, the best you can do is 5 stars. Then there's 4 stars and 3 stars. 67 communities have done it. We got 4 stars, so that's good. Only 4, again, have made it to 600 points. We are the first city in Michigan to get STAR certified. And as you can see, of course, you can all read this, right? My challenge to Angie was, I said, we just can't do worse than Columbus. So, so both Columbus and we are 4 stars, along with Portland and Evanston, so I think we're in really good company. And I know we could have gotten more points with more time and energy, but at some point, this is a level of effort, But it's created a way for us to start to look at ourselves across these other cities. So as John was saying, when we created the sustainability framework, we had kind of 4 big goal areas, and theme areas, and 16 goals. Well, we did ours before STAR. So what STAR has done is say, we're going to have 7 major areas, built environment, climate and energy, economy and jobs, education, arts and community, equity and empowerment, health and safety, natural systems. I'm not going to read the 44 underneath it, but we're going to touch on a few of these. It's really thorough. And, you know, it really gets into all the different pieces, equity, economy, that makes a community sustainable. So in the goal areas, here's our points. Sorry, I'm going to catch up since I don't have an electronic version. So you can see things like built environment. We're in the left side is the first quartile. The two boxes are the second and third quartile, and the one to the right is the upper quartile. So built environment, we're in the upper quartile. Climate and energy, upper quartile. Economy and jobs, only in the second quartile. And I'm going to not get way into the weeds because you can look at this online, and I honestly can't say that I can remember all 508 data points, but this just gives you a sense that compared to these 67 other cities, there's some areas that were really strong, and there's some areas that were not as strong. And the innovation process credits at the bottom, that's pretty much just bonus points. You know, if you can't show something in one area, but you think you're doing really well, that's an opportunity to kind of demonstrate that. We did put in information in there, and STAR pushed back and said, that's not enough detail. And they only give you one shot to kind of fix it and give it back to them. So, you know, I think there's definitely more innovation we could have gotten, but that's where we are. I'm going to jump through. Emily did a lot of animation and had a lot more detail she was going to share, but I'm not going to touch on all of that. So in built environment, I want to highlight, you know, compact and complete communities. We're in the upper area. Housing affordability. I'll give you an example of how STAR works. So STAR works under, there's either an outcome. Can you demonstrate that all of the housing that's been built in the last 5 years, 20% of it is affordable? Well, we cannot demonstrate that in Ann Arbor. It's just not true. So if you get the outcome, you get all the points. If you don't get the outcome, then there's a whole series of actions that you can say, well, I can't demonstrate that outcome, but I can demonstrate that I've got a housing commission. I've rebuilt 400 units of housing. I've got a housing needs assessment that's kind of demonstrating needs in the community. So that's where you start getting partial points. I would note that in public spaces, our park system, things like that, we got the highest score possible. Skipping through her animation. Climate. Let's see, I talked about housing affordability. All right, climate and energy. The interesting thing there, and I have to give credit to Andy, because if you look at CE4, you know, this is designed for all cities. Well, lots of cities like Detroit, Cleveland, they have a big industrial sector. And we don't have much. Well, we were not going to get any points in the industrial sector. So we argued that our industry is cranking out really smart people out of the University of Michigan. So because the U of M has done so well in energy efficiency and water resources, we claimed them as our industry. And so we got a bunch of points.
I didn't know that.
See?
And all I got was a pair of socks?
Well, you got a water thing too, I think.
I didn't even know, okay.
And see, all their stuff is available up on there's a university rating system called, what, ASHI, STAR?
Yeah, she started.
And so a lot of the university information's up there that we could tap without having to pester them. So that's just one of those things that there's a lot of nuance to how STAR works. I'm going to keep going. Waste minimization's another interesting one where you would think we started curbside recycling in 1978. We're pretty good recyclers, right? 46% diversion rate or so. Waste diversion is not a metric that STAR uses. The only thing they look at is, can you show that you've reduced the amount you've landfilled every year? And because of everything that's gone on with changes here with losing a print newspaper, and our baseline has changed. And we can't demonstrate that we've dropped the amount we've landfilled every year over the last few years, so we just didn't get a lot of points in that area. That's okay. Now we're starting to think, is that the right metric for us? If so, how do we move that forward? This is a lot of the business retention economy jobs. I got to give a lot of thanks to Spark for getting us data here. Let's see, I'm not going to touch on a lot of these. Quality jobs and living wages, I'll touch on that for a bit. So, does the city require all businesses to pay a living wage? No. Mostly because the state won't allow us to under state law. So there's certain things we're not going to get bonus points for that other cities can, like we can't have a building code stricter than the state because the state says we're not allowed to do that. We can't regulate plastic bags now because the state says we're not allowed to regulate plastic bags. So again, there's a few of these areas where we're not getting points because we just can't do that thing that lots of other cities can do in other places. Arts and culture is really interesting. Turns out there's databases that somehow measure how many people go to public events, art events.
Ann Arbor District Library events.
There you go. So I'm going to keep going. Equity and empowerment. This is an area that, we do a lot with civic engagement, but there's a lot of things the city does around equity and justice, but it's not formal policy. So I can't point to the document, the policy that STAR can go review and say, yes, you get points there. So this is another area where we may do things in practice, but we need to do a better job of codifying it, getting it down on paper so that we can actually document the progress there. Let me just catch up real quick. Health and safety. So I'm going to touch on, John talked about safe communities. So in STAR, it's literally, do you have less than 5.5 homicides per 100,000 people? We do. We get all the outcomes. So there's no actions that we're even putting in for. Let's see, food access, nutrition. I was really surprised. The emergency prevention and response, perfect score. So lots of good work going on by emergency management and police and fire. And again, these are off national standards. I'm going to touch on natural systems. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Invasive species there. We're in the third quartile. We've got a natural area preservation group. We've preserved a lot of open spaces, but for STAR, you need to show that no new invasive species have been established in the last 5 years in your key priority areas. So first of all, you've had to define your priority areas and then track that within those areas in the last 5 years, no new invasive species have come in. We just haven't done it that way. We've got certain natural areas that our natural area folks do native burns and things like that. So the question for us in categories like this are, well, a bunch of cities have said this is the way we should track invasive species. So I got to work with Dave Borneman to say, is this how we want to start tracking this? Or no, that's just way too hard and not within the way we're doing it. It's just an area we're not going to get as many points. Last one is interesting, working lands. We don't have a lot of working farmland or things like that, and that's what that category is all about. So again, I'm just saying that there's certain areas that you're going to see, we don't have a lot of points there. Is Ann Arbor falling down? And it's like, well, no, we just, that metric doesn't really work in our community. I'm going to stop fairly soon. I talked about some areas we don't have formal policy or code and couldn't document. Areas where we're strong, but we just can't demonstrate it. And there's definitely gaps, places where we're not working, we don't have well-developed policies or metrics. And the last one is, it probably would take a half-time person every year to keep track of these 508 data points. So as a community, we need to make that commitment that tracking these metrics in this systematic way is important, and we're going to resource it to make sure that it happens and we can track it over time. And this is a very complicated and messy, but thank you to all the community partners that were involved in this effort. It really, I can't say thanks enough. And you'll see AADL is in there because they do so much outreach, touches to the community. And last, and I want to thank Emily Drennen, who could not be here, but did this slide deck and helped us really push to get that last rush of all those points for stars. So thank you very much.
How's everybody doing so far, y'all? Like saturated
Stretch.
with data? You need to stand up, take a breath. Everybody okay? Continue, yeah? It's kind of nice, little nostalgia for me growing up in Ann Arbor, walking in this building, you know, it's changed a lot, but I mean, I used to come in here when I was 5 years old, and my mom used to read Dr. Seuss to me upstairs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the University of Michigan sustainability goals and our strategies that we're currently doing. Before I actually get into the goals themselves, I'm going to speak a little bit about the University of Michigan's demographics, kind of how we're set up, because it's important, because it relates to the goals. So our campus is in the colored sections, right? It's spread throughout the city of Ann Arbor, so clearly very integrated, you know, which is different than a lot of campuses across the country. We're old, obviously historic. We were established in 1817. Our medical school was actually established around 1850. We have around 3,200 acres within the city of Ann Arbor property alone, right? So this doesn't include stuff up in the biostation and other places in Michigan. That's just within the confines of Ann Arbor. Roughly 45,000 students, roughly 46,000 staff and faculty. That number, though, however, does include temporary staff as well, so it's not an FTE. We have roughly what we consider to be 380 major buildings on campus, though we have well more than 500 kind of structures, which would include parking structures, other types of infrastructure as well. Those total around 37 million square feet of infrastructure currently. And last year, roughly $1.2+ billion in research. So the characteristics of campus is really set up into kind of 4 major blocks or units. Michigan Medical, which many of you know is the hospital or health system complex within Ann Arbor, is huge. So, you know, over 20,000 full-time staff of that number I shared with you is in the health, is Michigan Medical alone. So that's a huge chunk. Around 1,000 licensed beds, 2 million patients a year. So a tremendous volume, right? Operation runs 24/7. Then we have the general fund, and the areas that fall underneath the general fund include all academic affairs, facilities and operations, which my unit reports up through, all utilities on campus, transportation, safety and security, and around 20,000 faculty and staff are within the general fund. Student life is what you would know as all of our residence halls. U of M dining, all of our residence halls, rec sports and unions serve roughly 3 million meals a year. So when you just start thinking about volume, right, we start thinking about sustainability and operational metrics, and these volume numbers should start kind of chinking in your head a little bit. Athletics, roughly 2 million square feet of facilities, roughly 1 million visitors every year to our athletic venues. This number does not include the new venues that are being built off of State Street that you've seen. So let's take a look at square feet by fund, right? We talked about sort of those different units or chunks. The largest in square feet, 22 million square feet, are within the general fund unit that I spoke of. The health system, six and a half. I'm getting a question from a kid in the back. That's great. That's great. Speak up now. 6.5 million square feet, right, in Michigan Medical. So keep that number in mind, because that plays a big part later when we start talking about the goals. About 5 million square feet in student life, so in our residence halls and unions. About 2 million square feet in athletics, and about 1.1 million square feet in what I'm calling auxiliaries, which is actually lease space that we have within the city of Ann Arbor. Everybody is familiar with a power plant, so we own and operate our own power plant. Everybody has seen it. It's on the corner, kind of on that corner of Huron, right? It's an old power plant. This is kind of a cool rendering of what it used to look like in the day. It was built in the early 1900s, and it was originally a coal-burning plant. And it was converted to natural gas in the 1960s as a really efficient natural gas cogeneration plant. So it's much more efficient and much cleaner than a coal plant. It provides steam, electricity, and compressed air and hot water to all of Central and Medical Campus. It's about twice as efficient as a coal plant. So that plant generates around, right now, 35% of the utilities that we use on campus, and we buy the other 65% on the grid from DTE, okay? Let's talk a little bit about the organization, just so you kind of see how we're aligned at the university, because we are big and decentralized. So my office, the Office of Campus Sustainability on the right, falls under Facilities and Operations. I report up to our Associate Vice President, Hank Beyer, who reports to our CFO, Kevin Haggerty, who reports to the President. A dotted line over from me on the academic side, you'll see the Graham Sustainability Institute. Their Deputy Director currently is Andrew Horning. They report up through the Vice Provost for Global Engagement and Learning, who reports to the Provost and reports to the President. So there's sort of two different kind of major arms of sustainability at the university, both academic and operations. The great thing is that we collaborate really closely. So the Graham Sustainability Institute and my office, work sort of elbow to elbow. We work together in defining the goals that we had, and we work on a variety of programmatic, large programs on campus. Underneath that, as you can imagine here at the university, for those of you who've been involved, we're very committee-driven, right? That's how we like to make decisions. So there are many sustainability committees across the board, kind of identified both in all these individual units, athletics, student life, but also working groups that kind of comprise representatives from all those units. All right, let's get to the good stuff, the goals. So our goals, somewhat similar to Ann Arbor, are aligned kind of in themes, right? And so on the left, you'll see our themes. So the major climate action theme for the University of Michigan, we have two sort of major goals. The first is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the year 2025 off of a 2006 baseline. And our next goal is to decrease carbon intensity of passenger trips on all University of Michigan transportation options by 30%. The first thing I would like to say about these goals is that they were established in 2011, okay? So they were established in 2011 over kind of a process of including faculty, staff, and students all working together to provide recommendations to our president, President Coleman at the time, who then took those recommendations and we created goals. So before 2011, our institution didn't have long-term sustainability goals. So in kind of the big picture, these are sort of relatively new for us, right? And the end goal is to complete these measurable goals by 2025. Our waste prevention goal is to reduce the amount of waste tonnage, basically, we have going to landfills by 40%. We have a healthy environments goal to purchase at least 20% of all U of M food according to our sustainable food guidelines, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And to protect the Huron River by reducing runoff and reducing chemicals by 40% on all of our land use. So that's an important one. We also have, under community awareness, a lot of really important culture and education goals. I'm not going to go into those today due to the time constraints because I only have 15 or 20 minutes, but I'd be more than happy to share what we're doing on that end of things if you get a hold of me or get a hold of our office. So let's talk about probably our most difficult goal from an achievement perspective first, and that's our greenhouse gas reduction goal. So our greenhouse gas reduction goal is to reduce emissions by 25% by the year 2025 off a 2006 baseline. In 2006, our baseline was around 680,000 metric tons, and for us to achieve this goal, we need to get down to around 510,000 metric tons, which you see the yellow line. You can see over time some fluctuation, right? So the blue bars represent the actual emissions, the yellow bar represents our goal. One thing I would like to say is this goal is based off of scope 1 and 2, scope 2 emissions only, okay? So scope 1 emissions are related to all the emissions associated with operating, heating, and cooling all of our buildings on campus, basically. Scope 2 emissions are associated with all the emissions associated with all the vehicles that we own and operate on campus. All our buses, all our University of Michigan vehicles, our fleet. We don't count Scope 3 emissions into our greenhouse gas reduction goal. Scope 3 emissions would be, for example, if you track the amount of emissions associated with travel to and from campus for staff, like living off campus, or the amount of emissions associated with travel that we may take for business travel, like when faculty fly to Europe for the summer. I don't do that, but you know what I mean? So these are just Scope 1 and 2 emissions only. Talk a little bit about strategies. So I talked about the efficiency of the power plant, and I mentioned that we supply about 35% of the utility use, and we buy the other 65% on the grid. The other 65% from DTE, we count all the emissions associated with that, okay? And most of that, 70% currently of their profile, roughly, maybe a little less, comes from coal-fired power plants. And so that emission footprint is really big. So if we can increase the efficiency of the power plant and reduce the amount of energy or utility we buy from DTE, that's going to help our footprint. So we recently, I don't know if any of you have been involved or read in the papers, but there's been a project approved to add a 15 megawatt turbine at the power plant, which will increase our capacity and our ability to generate cleaner power by using our power plant, and it will reduce the amount of energy that we buy from DTE. DTE is one of our partners, and they're working towards some great things, and we're working with them on some other things, but this is a great opportunity for campus to reduce our footprint in the short term. That project will break ground fairly soon, and we anticipate that new turbine to be online in roughly 2020. Another thing that we're doing is we continue to do is, we'll talk about campus growth in a little bit, but we do a lot with sustainable building design. We have a team that works within OCS that does energy conservation in existing buildings. The ECMs are energy conservation measures. And we're looking at facilities and behavior use, how to schedule our buildings maybe differently, how to schedule classes differently to conserve more energy. And then I highlighted in red because I think that the message here for our greenhouse gas reduction goal is, in order for us to make significant progress on that goal and even go beyond that, is we need to have a higher percentage of renewable power in our portfolio. We can only do so much on campus, and I think that's going to be a need that we'll have to pursue in the near future for us to make significant progress. Our waste reduction goal has been a challenge for us as well. So again, 40% reduction by 2025 is our goal. If you can look back into the 2006, we roughly were at around 14,000 tons, 13,800, I believe. Our goal is to get down to 7,900 tons. You've seen here on the graph kind of a wide fluctuation, I would say, in our waste numbers over time, but clearly more progress needs to be made. All right, so does everybody remember, I don't have any candy to give out. Does anybody remember the square feet when I showed the slide with a pie chart and had the square feet of the different funds? Does anybody remember what the square feet was for Michigan Medical? Ding, good job. So 37 million square feet of total facilities, right? Michigan Medical comprises 6.5 million square feet of that, yet they generate around 56% of the total waste that we have going to landfill. So there's sort of one of our major challenges. And you can imagine why, right? They're huge. They operate 24/7. If any of you have been, I know I have been in the hospital for a stay or visit, you can just see the amount of stuff sort of generated. And this is only the non-regulated medical waste I'm talking about. I'm not even talking about regulated medical waste, potentially hazardous. This is the stuff that actually just goes right into the regular landfill. So that's sort of a huge challenge for us. There's another piece I'll talk about in a minute. So what are some strategies? We had an audit done at the health system. We hired an outside consultant from California who's specialized in this space, in medical space, and they did a really thorough audit, and they identified kind of some low-hanging fruit for us to pursue in our health system in Michigan Medical, and we're going to have some pilot programs starting this spring, and we're pretty excited about it. So we think we can make a dent on that 56%. Can we, I appreciate that. Can we wait till the end for questions? Thank you. Well, the other thing that we've done is we've noticed that outside of Michigan Medical and our regular buildings on campus, we have a large percentage of potentially compostable waste that's generated either every day through people like me bringing fruit and vegetables in the core and the peels go in the trash to events that we host on campus. So we host a lot of events, right? We host trainings, we host all kinds of events where food is catered in, and all that waste is potentially compostable instead of going to the solid waste stream. So we did some waste analysis and we determined roughly 30 to 35% of the total waste leaving our regular sort of like classroom administrative buildings could potentially be diverted into a compost stream. So we're taking a real active role in expansion of that program to attack that. This is one of the ways that we're doing it. One of the programs that we have is we have a couple team members within OCS that are spearheading this. It's called the Zero Waste Event Program on campus, where we're really taking an active role in getting out and working with units all across campus to make sure that these large events that they're hosting, I mean, they can be small, but many of them are really large, like even commencement, right? That all the waste that's potentially compostable from those events, from food, is diverted and composted instead of going into the landfill. Also, all of our residence halls, all the compost, pre and post-consumer compost from all the dining halls and the residence halls, when I mentioned earlier, 3 million meals a year served, that's all being diverted. So over 600 tons of that material is being diverted to being compost now instead of landfill. So we're making some great progress there. Sustainable food is a big deal. Food is a big deal on campus. We have a couple of students, or at least one that I know of in the audience, but sustainable food and food systems is very popular on campus with our students. And we have a goal to serve at least 20% of our food on campus in our residence halls and our dining halls to be certified organic, third-party certified, or grown or processed within 250 miles of Ann Arbor. And so we made great progress here. And you can see we're roughly at 14% of all food served on campus fits this definition. But it's amazing. It's not amazing. I shouldn't be amazed. I'm not that old, but in our residence halls, I would throw out, what do you think still like the highest percentage of food type that's served in our residence hall are? Pete's close. That's second. Huh? Chicken nuggets. Chicken nuggets. And we're having a hard time finding organic chicken nuggets. Certified organic. I'm not kidding. Like they love chicken nuggets still. So we have some challenges, but we're working on it.
At least you're tracking it.
Very healthy foods.
Yeah, this is what I'm super proud of too, because it's a program obviously that has huge impacts, right, for the city of Ann Arbor and our entire community. It's not. I don't view this as sort of a University of Michigan goal, right? I view this as sort of more of a community-based goal. And that is to protect the Huron River by reducing the amount of kind of land-based, man-made chemical applications. And you can see we've had tremendous progress, right, since 2006. I mean, one year in 2014, we actually were well below our goal of 40%. We had some bump ups there, but a lot of that, interestingly, is sort of, we've recognized that a lot of it is weather related. So fluctuations in weather often have a great impact on how much has to be applied, but many of our areas have gone completely organic. And I don't know if any of you have been out at Radrick Golf Course the last couple of years, but we've also sort of investigated really innovative ways to reduce the amount of herbicides we're using on plants. So we found out that goats apparently have an affinity for poison ivy. And there was a lot of poison ivy in the rough in Radrick Golf Course, and apparently a lot of golfers aren't right down the fairway, so when their balls would go into the rough, right, it was an issue. Well, so we actually leased goats from some local farmers and put up some fencing. I should have had a picture, and the goats, they just love that stuff, and they eat it. They eat it up. They eat everything. And so we'll fence in an area, bring the goats in. They'll eat that area. We'll move them to another part of the course, and they'll eat that area. It's great, right? Organic. People love it. Goats love it. Everybody's happy.
And then you serve it in the dining hall.
No, we do not serve the goat, no. No. You heard that from John, not me. We do not serve the goats in the dining hall. Let's talk a little bit just quickly about challenges as I sort of big picture wrap up here a little bit. One of the challenges, major challenges we have related to our goals is that we sort of have competing priorities at the institution, right? So our mission is healthcare, teaching, and research. And to meet that mission, we continue to grow as an institution in infrastructure, roughly 1% to 2% a year, and build more of these types of facilities. So as we're doing that, right, they're adding resources to the grid. And so that's sort of, counters some of what we do. It makes it a little bit more challenging. Another thing is just, I talked about those different chunks, right? The general fund, athletics, student life. They're all independent. They have different budget models, though we do have a president and a board of regents. They all act sort of completely independently. This is a look at our overall population, right? So in addition to building growth, we have more people on campus. We also had the issue of attrition, right? We have students graduating every year and a whole new group coming in that have to be trained and how to be sustainably responsible when they're on campus. This is building area in square feet. So you can see, since '06, when we were down about 27 million square feet, now we're 37. This does include the NCRC acquisition that John spoke of, but this is a huge challenge for us. I think one of the things that I would like to end with is that one of the benefits I see, however, that we have as an institution is that we have a great collaborative relationship with students and faculty with subject matter expertise. So even though our office is sort of aligned up through, right, facilities and operations, this is going to take collaborative work to solve these issues. It's not just our office. And we know that, and our faculty know that, and our students are all on board. We have a greenhouse gas reduction committee that reports to the president that's comprised of faculty, students, and staff all working together to solve these complex problems. So that is one thing that really benefits us, is that we have a rich environment with a lot of really smart people that take this seriously, that are working on it. So that's sort of all I had for you tonight. I hope you found some of that useful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would end by only repeating what I said earlier. Stay engaged. Hold us, meaning the city, the university, accountable for achieving results. And if we're not achieving results, then the kinds of actions that you're talking about, you need to raise again and say, folks, you're not doing what you need to do. You need to go back and look at a community-based education center for sustainability, or this, or this, or this. And as long as we're not tracking, we're not delivering, then you're not holding us accountable for achieving that, then we will not do what we need to do. So by coming out tonight, you've done the right thing, and continue to come out, and thank you very much. And
This program was recorded on February 8th, 2018, at the Ann Arbor District Library.